Welcome to HFY Stories. Please subscribe to the channel. Your one click means the world to me. Riley's hand hovered near the ration bar. Behind the reinforced glass, 4 instructors held their breath, and Commander Thraxful's claws had gone white against the rail. The predator in the pit hadn't eaten in 3 days, and it was staring down a girl who thought this was a museum. He'd tell this story for years, and he'd always start close to the end. At the one moment, he genuinely didn't know how it would go. But to explain how a human wound up alone in a kill box with the deadliest animal on the moon, you needed to go back 7 days to a stack of paperwork nobody bothered to double-check. Vexora processed Academy admissions the way his species did everything, methodically, without curiosity. 17 cycles of stamping approvals had taught him the threat assessment engine didn't make mistakes. So when a human's file crossed his desk rated a drowsy 21, he didn't question it. A footnote mentioned an ambassador, a throne chair, an accidental trade agreement, not his problem. The routing code was 1 digit off from the code for the Combat Academy, also not his problem. He stamped it, filed it, and Riley Harrison became, for 30 seconds, the most consequential error of his career. She came down the transport ramp with a backpack full of paint-flecked pins and a travel mug, and the effect on the landing platform was immediate. A 6-bodied hive mind brood froze mid-stride. A living column of fire dimmed to embers. Thraxful, who had buried heroes and trained the ones who replaced them, felt something twist in his chest as she photographed the blast doors and murmured about architectural energy. When he told her flatly that this was not an art school, she laughed and pointed to a brochure line about forging excellence through fire, certain it was a metaphor. He decided to let the moon do what conversation couldn't. She'd wash out by lunch. He was wrong within the hour. She ran the gravity-shifting endurance loop 2 minutes under the record, humming the whole way. She treated a maze of lasers and crushers like a light installation and danced through it to a rhythm only she could hear, finishing in under 5 minutes against a record of 11. Handed a plasma cutter, she called it an energy chisel and carved a training dummy into something that looked, unsettlingly, like a flower. By the time the instructors gathered that night, 7 combat veterans sat around Thraxful's table looking like men who'd watched a law of physics quietly repeal itself. Krelenix reported she'd snapped a military-grade support beam just by leaning against it. Vorgeth said she'd stopped mid-climb, 100 feet up, to admire a streak of mineral in the rock, then finished the course in half the required time. Then came the toxin trials, 17 graduated doses of atmospheric poison, standard tolerance building, the kind that had put half the brood in medical after 8. Harrison sat through all 17, sketching the other cadets, said the light-headedness gave her interesting distortions to draw, and asked if there were more. The telepath Morvax admitted he'd run full FIR projection on her, cosmic insignificance, death, the usual collapse-inducing catalogue, and found her, underneath it, calmly weighing whether cobalt or cerulean beta captured the mood. The weapons master, Fextel, described her improvising, on instinct, techniques he'd spent 40 years earning, with a blade only senior cadets were cleared to hold. She isn't an outlier, Thraxful said. She's what a 21 actually is. We built the wrong scale and never noticed. So he sent her into the gauntlet meant for cadets 3 years senior, the one with the 60% injury rate, to find out what would finally stop her. Which put her, by the 3rd level, kneeling in front of the creature the cadets called Nasher, breaking a ration bar in half. Its jaws dropped low enough to take the food, or the hand beneath it. And then, with a gentleness that belonged to nothing that size, it lifted the bar from her palm with its teeth and folded down beside her like an overgrown, oversized pet. She scratched behind the ridge of its skull and told it the bar was terrible, but at least had protein. Over the comm she asked, conversationally, whether there was a lunch break, and if she could bring her new friend to the cafeteria. "Call it off," Vorgeth said, already backing toward the exit. "I'm done. I'm going to farm mushrooms somewhere quiet." The next morning, Riley sat across from Thraxful's desk with a sketchbook under one arm, still certain she was a week into an experimental arts program. He turned a hologram toward her, the acceptance letter, unread past its header the first time she'd seen it. "Read the name at the top," he said. She leaned in, and this time she actually tracked the words. Combat Academy, not Creative Arts. She kept reading weapons certification, lethal force clearance, survival protocols, each line landing like something breaking underfoot. "So the obstacle courses," she said slowly, "weren't installations." "Combat drills," said Krelinix. "And the cutter wasn't a chisel." "A weapon," Vorgath said, "built to disarm someone in armor." "And Nasher isn't a misread sculpture of primal nature." "He's killed 6 cadets," Thraxful said. "You had lunch with him." The room braced. Every intelligence file on human temperament predicted fury here. Legal had paperwork ready. Instead, Riley put both hands over her face and laughed, open and unguarded, until she had to wipe her eyes. "I genuinely thought this school had the strangest, most elaborate sense of humor in the galaxy," she said. "No wonder everyone looked at me like I'd lost my mind." Thraxful had expected to apologize, sign her transfer, close the file. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in 17 years of command. He asked instead of ordered. He turned her performance record to face her. 42 Academy marks broken or matched in a single week by someone who hadn't known she was being scored. "What you could do here, knowing exactly what this place is," he said, "I have no way to calculate. I'm not asking you to stay as an error in the system. I'm asking you to stay as a cadet." She looked at the numbers the way a stranger looks at someone else's vacation photos, curious, unhurried, no stake in them yet. Then she smiled, differently this time. "Can I keep the sketchbook?" "Bring whatever earns its place," Vorgath said. "You've more than earned yours." "And lunch with Nasher. I've decided he's Gerald now." "The bioweapon has a name," Krelinix muttered, and didn't argue further. She stayed. Vexora received 2 documents that same week, a formal reprimand for failing to verify a threat classification and a commendation for an unprecedented, high-yield recruitment. He filed both under a folder he'd started keeping quietly for cases that refused to resolve, and went back to checking every application twice, sometimes 3 times. 3 cycles later, Riley graduated with the highest combat marks in the Academy's 200-year record, and a thesis arguing that violence, properly understood, was just another form of composition. She left to build a security firm that specialized in threats nobody else took seriously enough to see coming. Gerald went with her, trading the pit for sunbeams, and long afternoons spent holding still while she sketched the curve of his spine. Thraxful never framed the acceptance letter. What he kept, on the shelf behind his desk among 4 decades of commendations, was a single drawing. Gerald rendered soft-eyed and drowsing. Finished the day he'd finally sat still long enough, signed in the corner in Riley's looping hand. New recruits always asked about it. He always gave them the same answer and sent them to find out for themselves, because the woman who ran the survival gauntlet now was standing 3 corridors away, humming.